Hey there, today I'm going to be drawing some more diesel engines. The book Enterprising Engines features several diesels from the other railway, two of which have a speaking role and one even gets to stay on Sodor. However, there are several other diesels who either only appear in a single illustration or get a passing mention. It's high time these engines got a bit more love, and this video seems like the right place for it. We see this engine in Escape, when Oliver tells Douglas about an experience he'd had with diesels during his escape to Sodor. He'd hid on an old quarry branch line, and his driver and fireman had covered up the entrance with dirt and rubbish in order to avoid being spotted. We see two diesels, one of which is a large blue engine. Unlike most Mystery Thomas characters, we actually know the exact engine that appears here. The engine looks to be a BR Class 28, or Metropolitan Vickers Diesel Electric Type 2, aka the same type of engine as Boko. Only one engine of this class was ever repainted into British Rail blue livery, and that was D5701. The Class 28s weren't named by British Railways, but I've decided to call him Crossley, which I think fits his expression. I've drawn Crossley hauling a train of vans. The 28s were originally built for express mainline duties, but they had a lot of problems. They were noisy, produced a lot of smoke, and were prone to breaking down. After a rework at their former manufacturers, the Class 28s returned to service, but were now consigned to secondary services on smaller lines. The interesting thing about this engine is that during the period the story was set, he didn't have much time left himself. He was withdrawn from service in 1968, the same year as the book was published. It seems a bit hypocritical of him to try and send another engine to an early grave when he himself was on the brink of being withdrawn. Perhaps he was hoping that capturing Oliver would get him recognised by BR for his achievements, and they would keep him around. I like to think that Crossley believes that Sodor is anti-progress, and that's the reason why they still have steam engines around. He doesn't know that his brother Boko is on the island, and was overhauled at Crovan's Gate Works to fix the problems inherent to his class. The ironic thing is that Crossley would have probably been better off escaping to Sodor too, so that he could potentially receive the same treatment as Boko and live a happy and useful life. But he was just too stuck in his ways, and so he met his demise at just 10 years old. But with all that said, here is the finished picture. So this next engine is just one of many Class 08 shunters as seen throughout the franchise. There's just one difference with this one in particular. His face is on the other end. Now, for a long time I used to think that this was a Class 20 or English Electric Type 1. That would explain why the face is on the cab, since that's generally considered to be the front of the engine and there's no grille on the other end, so it would make a lot of sense. Except, no. The Class 20s never wore hazard warning stripes. There's also the fact that none of them worked in or around Cumbria, and so the chances of Crossley crossing paths with the Class 20 would have been minimal, especially after around 1961 or so. This left me with the question, if this engine really is a Class 08, or one of the similar looking classes of diesel shunter, why is his face on the back? Well, I had a think, and ultimately came up with the conclusion of, It got me thinking about other engines with two faces when it would make more sense to only have one. It's shown in illustrations that engines with two cabs, like Toby and the majority of larger diesel engines, can project their face onto either end of their body. Then there are the Coldy Fell engines, who only have one cab but have a face on either end. The face on the cab is so they can see what's ahead of them as they descend the mountain travelling cab first. If anything, their front faces are redundant because they have to push their coaches upwards, and they do the looking. It makes me wonder, maybe any tenderless engine can project their face onto their rear end, and many just choose not to. Perhaps this engine dared to break societal norms, or perhaps he just spends a lot of time travelling in reverse, or maybe he just likes to talk out of his arse, who knows. I spent some time trying to figure out a name for this engine. Eventually I thought back to the book Bumface by Maurice Gleitzman. The story stars a character called Angus Solomon, who plays a character called Bumface in his school play, at least until he's fired for missing too many rehearsals. We've already got a character in the Thomas verse called Angus, so I figured I'd call this engine Solomon. Crossley and Solomon often worked together, with Solomon usually taking the lead. A lot of what Crossley knew about steam engines, the modernisation plan and Sodor's railways was stuff that he'd heard from Solomon, and Solomon was not always the most reliable source of information. He had a tendency to stretch the truth to fit his own agenda, and managed to convince Crossley that it's better to stay on the mainland than cross the bridge to live on Sodor. I want to make a comment about Solomon's colour scheme. The wiki claims that he is painted in a black livery, but we can't really see any of his body that isn't the end of his cap, which features the hazard warning stripes, so we can't say for certain what livery he wore. BR stopped painting their diesel engines black sometime in the late 1950s, and so whilst it's not impossible, it seems unlikely that Solomon would still be rocking a black livery 10 years later, especially when the engine that is on the cusp of withdrawal has received a new blue livery. The mid to late 60s was a transitional period for BR diesel liveries, as the switch was being made from green to blue. I figured that Solomon being painted green at this point would have made more sense than black. And, with that said and done, here is the completed image. And, finally, here's the one that's a complete mystery. He is known simply as a passing diesel, and mentioned when Oliver and Douglas make their escape to Sodor, where he yells out to inform other engines and station staff that a steam engine is escaping. We don't know what he looked like, where he came from, what his name was, or anything. I originally drew this character as a Class 27, or the BRCW Type 2, as you might be able to notice throughout much of the time lapse. However, I somehow ended up finishing the drawing without realising that these engines only worked in Scotland, so later I had to hastily redraw the engine to look more like a Class 25 instead. Oops. Luckily they don't look overly different from one another, and the 25s worked all over the country, so I think I got away with that one. Some of the Class 25s, or Seltzer Type 2s, were stationed at Carlisle, so it's possible that some may have passed through Barrow. Speaking of passing through, there's a certain other character in the Thomas franchise who has been known to do this. P.T. Boomer, the scrapped character from Thomas and the Magic Railroad. The PT in his name literally stands for passing through. They were going to make an Ertl toy of him before he was cut from the film, but listings for this cancelled toy refer to him as Pete Boom for unknown reasons. I suspect that whoever was responsible for writing the listings probably misheard the name, and the error just never got corrected. Pete might not be P.T. Boomer's real name, but it could be the name of this diesel who is also passing through. I've drawn Pete with his headlights on at full blast, which is not a pleasant experience for poor old Toad. I've also drawn snow on the ground, as is accurate to the original book illustrations. I'll admit that for a long time I never noticed that there was snow in the original story. I think I was just used to the TV series adaptation, which seemingly takes place during the summer. And here is the finished illustration. And there you have it. 3 more mystery diesels from the other railway given a new lease of life. There was even less to work with here than there was in the previous video, but that just meant that I could add more of my own ideas, and I think I ended up with some fun and interesting characters. I'll have another video out next week, so make sure you're subscribed and you don't miss it, and I'll see you then.